Well, as all of our board members are aware, and I'm guessing most of our community is aware, is Governor DeWine introduced his proposal for the new state budget for the next 2 years. That state budget could have and will likely have a major impact on the funding of public schools in Ohio. So this evening I wanted to spend a few minutes sharing with you information regarding the proposed state budget and the potential impacts on our school district. I think in order to have a full understanding of the impact of the budget on Medina City schools, it's important to really look back at our recent history. One thing I'm going to talk about in the presentation are ways that parents, community members, students, staff can reach out to legislators to advocate for our school district. And in the time that I've spent in Columbus working with organizations and working with legislators, one of the things they emphasize over and over again is the importance of districts sharing their stories. And really putting a personal note to it in regards to how funding impacts students and kids overall in our community. So our recent history, as we're aware, has been littered with financial challenges. We were placed in fiscal caution by the Ohio Department of Education. And this was due to our 5-year forecast. We had been deficit spending in order to spend down funds within our budget. And we got to a position in year 3 where we were looking at going into the red or negative. This is a sign where the state intervenes and ensures that strategies are put into place for school districts in order to make sure that they are fiscally sound. One of the strategies that was implemented was a $2 million in reductions. The second strategy that was implemented was to put a levy on the ballot. And we had a lot of conversation in regards to what kind of levy was needed and presented that information to our community. The levy did not pass on its first 2 attempts, and that had consequences for our district. In addition to the original $2 million in reductions, an additional $2 million in reductions going into the following school year after the 2 levy failures resulted in 48 staff members being reduced within the school district as well as other programming. We were very fortunate to see our community come to our support, actually just this past November. That support resulted in a fixed 10-year, $7.5 million levy passing. The passage of that levy allowed us to avert an additional $8 million in reductions, which would have completely changed the landscape of our school district and how students were receiving their education within our communities. We are in a position right now after the passage of the levy where we are fiscally sound with tight belts. So the look at continued reductions because of deficit spending is something that we are continuing to do, and the goal has been to do that through attrition. Unfortunately, with the governor's proposed budget, it throws a wrench after just passing our levy and gaining that community support. And the reason why is because his proposed budget as it stands would result in another $1.5 million in reductions for our school district, $1.5 million in less state funding for our school district. And if you look at what the result of $4 million in reductions with 48 staff positions and other programming being reduced, us already being in a position where we're looking at making an additional $2 million cuts over time through attrition because of continued deficit spending, the $1.5 million that we could be facing is a real challenge for us in continuing to offer programming like we currently do. So a little information about the proposed state budget. The proposed state budget that the governor has presented has $103.4 million in reductions statewide. So he's looking at reducing the amount of money going to districts across the state. The theory behind this is that the state overall has seen a reduction in enrollment. This isn't due to students going to private schools. It's not due to the voucher system. It's just due to a decline in the population of young people across the state. This reduction isn't hitting districts all the same way. So the formula within the proposed budget is faulty. We are a district that is facing $1.5 million in reductions over the next 2 years with this proposal. There are districts in the state that would be gaining funds. There's some districts that would be remaining flat. So we as a district are in an unfortunate situation. We have a stabilized student enrollment. The state has done enrollment studies for us, 2 of them recently over the last 3 to 5 years. Both of those studies conducted by the state are predicting that our enrollment stays where it is now over the next 10 years. Despite that, we're facing a potential reduction. I'm aware of districts that I've worked with in Columbus, in the Columbus area, that are actually seeing pretty drastic increases in their enrollment in their districts. We're all aware of how Columbus has just been booming over the last 10 years, and those districts are facing reductions. So finding the rhyme or reason within the formula, when you talk about overall reductions due to decreased students in schools, it doesn't make a lot of sense with the specific schools and communities that are impacted by these actual reductions. Another key issue with the proposal is it doesn't take into account the drastically increasing property values within communities, which impacts the formula of how school districts are funded. And it also doesn't take inflation into account. So the proposed funding of public schools in Ohio is based off of 22 figures, not 24 figures. And in addition to that, with the rising property values within communities, it affects what levels of fundings districts will receive, because wealthier districts receive less money, and if property values are going up, which is how they determine the wealth of a school district, it's going to again decrease the amount of funding that a school district receives. And I think this is the major thing that many of these public schools in Columbus are facing. So the impact on Medina City schools, as I mentioned, a $1.5 million projected loss as things stand over a 2-year period. And the impact of this, and it's difficult to stand up here and talk about this again because it wasn't that long ago. It was just the beginning of this school year, maybe in September, where I talked about reductions. We would have no choice but to implement further reductions, which we were not planning on doing with the passage of the levy other than the ones through attrition. We would have no choice but to look deeper into various ways that we would need to make reductions so we don't go into a position of fiscal watch again. So the overall impacts to Medina City schools. I think one important piece to look at is the little amount of funding we already receive from the state. So with a $1.5 million reduction, we will be receiving extremely low amounts of support from the state. In Medina City schools, the average per pupil expenditure is about $13,000 per year. Currently, approximately $850 of that comes from the state. So that $850 per student would be reduced. And as I already mentioned, the inputs for the formula are outdated. They're 22 figures. Putting 24 figures into the formula, considering the property value increases and also inflation, could have a major impact on how that formula would impact schools. So negative consequences, which means even with the new levy, we would be facing a shortfall in funding. The other challenge that we face with the proposed budget is the burden that it puts on our community. Our community in November, our strategy was not to try and sway community members which way to vote, but to present options of what they want from our schools, and then communicate what the costs would be in order to maintain the kind of programming or class sizes within our district. In order to maintain what we currently have, the burden is again shifted to our local property tax payers and our local community members in order to provide more funding for our schools. Now, why is that happening? Because the state looks at schools across the state. If you're considered a wealthy district based off your property values, as we all know, our values just drastically went up here in the community. The state says, well, you're even wealthier now, you should be able to pay more for your local schools. What's really frustrating with this mindset is that, and we've talked about this before, our funding system in Ohio by Ohio Supreme Court over 2 decades ago was determined as unconstitutional. And one of the primary reasons why it was considered unconstitutional is because of the heavy reliance in the state on property taxes to fund the public schools. And I actually just heard this figure last week, and I just about fell out of my chair. We've got a lot of pride in Ohio, not just here in Medina, but in Ohio as well. And we expect our students to perform at top levels when compared to other states. But we don't want to fund our schools to help our students perform at those top levels. Ohio currently is ranked 35th in the country in terms of the amount of funding that's provided at the state level to fund public schools. And obviously, if this proposed plan goes into place, we're going to drop even further, even lower. Property tax limits, and this is a real challenge, and it's something we faced with the last levy as a misunderstanding, is people assume because their property values are going up, schools are getting additional funds. For us, that's not the case. Because we are not at the funding floor and we're on the guarantee. I'm not going to get into the details of those tonight, but I would encourage, if you want information, to reach out to Mr. Chambers and myself, because we're willing to have those conversations. But it puts us in a situation where the increased property values are not having any kind of major impact on the funding that we're receiving. So when a levy is passed, such as our last levy for $14.4 million, all we'll ever receive for that levy is $14.4. It won't be increased with the increase of property values. So what are the impacts on our students? This is the message that I think is important to talk about. And again, it goes back to what are our expectations as a community for our schools and our students. But this is literally pulled from the list that we had presented to the board back in September, because we would have to look at the same kind of reductions. The elimination of programming, the reduction in staffing. I estimate in order to meet the reduction level we would need, We would be facing approximately around 15 staff that would need to be reduced. In order to reduce those staff, it means reducing programs like what you see up here, as well as increasing class sizes. No matter what we do, I think it's important to emphasize that we are committed to our students and our community. And whatever level of funding we have, we are going to do everything we can to provide the best education for our students possible. The next piece that I wanted to share some information about is the voucher program. And the voucher program does have a direct impact on public schools in Ohio. And our board elected several years ago to be advocates against the voucher program because of the money that it disallows from going to public schools. The original intent of the voucher program, which has actually been around for quite a while, I want to say approximately 15 plus years. The original intent of the voucher program was to help families and kids living in low social economic areas that didn't have the same kind of access to high quality education that other students in Ohio had. And the voucher program served that purpose for a number of years. I can tell you that if you talk to the voucher program originally impacted the big city schools more than anybody, and if you talk to school leaders in those districts, they'll tell you that it hurt them back then because it was diverting funding away from their schools to make them better, sending kids to voucher schools, which generally do not perform at the same levels. The current reality, and this has literally occurred over the last 2 years, is that the voucher program is no longer serving low economic families the way that it used to. It's actually a program where it's now serving the wealthy. It's serving households that have 6- and 7-figure salaries whose students never even attended a public school or Medina City schools to begin with. And I'm going to show you some specific data for Medina City schools and how that has impacted us. Last year, the state spent just about $1.2 billion in voucher programming. This is a drastic increase from previous years. And those funds, if they were rediverted back to the public schools, could completely solve the funding issue across Ohio. So this is our district. You can see back in 21-22 and 22-23, this is the amount of students participating in the voucher program. The vast majority of those students were local economic families taking advantage of the voucher program. If we jump from the 22-23 to the 23-24 school year, the whole chart just drastically shifts. The amount of students that are taking advantage, or families taking advantage of the voucher program, are wealthier, and high-income families. So looking at the percentage increase blows my mind. This didn't happen over the course of a short period of time. This happened in a year. An 1,800% increase, a 1,700% increase in terms of students receiving vouchers, wealthy families utilizing vouchers, those funds not being available to help Medina City schools. And we are not seeing a decrease in enrollment because of this voucher usage. Again, these are kids, these are families that never attended Medina City schools to begin with. Parents made a choice for alternative education options for their own reasons for students, and now are benefiting from public funds to help them fund those individual options. I think what really is lost in this conversation is when we look at Ohio as a whole. I've heard comments made about voucher programs is good for Ohio, it's good for kids, but the reality is 89% of students across Ohio attend a public school. So the vast majority of students and kids in Ohio are going to a public school, yet we're shifting funding for the 10% to support schools that are non-public schools when it's in our Constitution that there must be a common education, public education system funded and supported through Ohio. So if you look at the chart here, traditional districts, which are public schools, have seen a almost $32 million reduction in funding and are facing an additional $40 million in reductions over the next 2 years. Meanwhile, other schools, non-public schools, are seeing pretty drastic increases, especially when you consider that this is 11% of kids across Ohio, dramatic increases in the funding. So what can we do? What we can do is make sure our legislators understand how state funding and the state funding proposal that's currently out there impacts our students. And that's why I'm sharing the information tonight. We are very proactive as a school district. We're members of multiple organizations. This past year, I've actually been asked to serve on the Executive Legislative Committee for the Alliance for High Quality Education. So I am in Columbus regularly working with other school leaders and legislators to advocate for public schools. The other piece is really working with our community, which is a step in what we're trying to do tonight, because we have our voice as a district, but the voice of our community and what they want from our schools, I'll tell you, means even more to legislators. They're voted for by our community members. So it's vital that our community reaches out to legislators in order to let them know how this is going to impact Medina City schools and what kind of funding and education we expect here in Medina to support our schools. I'm talking to you tonight because there's still time. The timeline for a budget is the governor makes a proposal, then that proposal goes through the House and the Senate. Currently, the budget proposal is in the House. We anticipate that within the next week or two, the House will release that budget to the Senate, and then the Senate will take time to review the budget. As the budget goes through both the House and the Senate, multiple changes are going to be made to that proposal. The deadline, however, for that proposal to be voted on and passed is July 1st. So that's our timeline to reach out to our local legislators. So how can you help? Stay informed. Look for information. We provide information on our website, through our podcast, through our regular newsletters and emails that go out. Contact your legislators. Let them know how it impacts Medina City schools, because quite frankly, they're serving large areas and they may not really be knowledgeable on how these funding changes will impact schools. And then spread awareness. We need people to talk about this. I've included up here this evening is our area legislator contact information. Sharon Ray in District 66. I can tell you that we have had communications with Sharon. We actually had, I think, brunch with her this past summer to talk to her about Medina City schools, and we've had board members reach out. Mark Romachek for District 22 in the Senate. Governor Mike DeWine, of course, this is his original proposal, and then Max Miller, our U.S. Congress representative. And again, the key here is sharing our story so that our legislators can make informed decisions when they're working within their committees down in Columbus and then eventually taking votes. So that ends my presentation this evening. We are going to make this presentation available on our website. We also intend to send this out to all staff because it's important that our staff members are informed. In addition, I would like to thank the board. If you haven't noticed, and I'm talking to the community, on the board agenda tonight is a resolution for our board members to take a vote on advocating for fair school funding and to support our schools. And the hope is that's a resolution we'll be able to pass tonight and then sending that resolution on to our legislators down in Columbus as well as here locally so that we can garner their support in supporting Medina City schools. At this time, are there any questions from the board regarding the proposed budget?
Excuse me. It was stark seeing the slide with the increase in the number of vouchers being used. The one that, you know, just the huge increase. Any idea of what that is in dollars?
Not in a local level. At a state level, though, we did share that in the beginning of the slideshow. Here it is. These are the dollars statewide. I don't have the breakdown for you this evening on how that impacts specifically Medina City schools, but we will pull those numbers and make those available to the board and on our website.
I think for the public of our school system would be very interested to know what that is in millions of dollars. I'm sure it's in millions.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Well, especially because right here, the increase of 88.6 million is for only 11% of Ohio students. So proportionately already.
Right. So if you look at the per pupil expenditure, it's completely slanted in terms of what public school students are receiving versus voucher when you look here at Medina.
And I think you need to repeat that we have not lost students. That's something that clicked with me. We have not lost students. These are students who are already going to these private schools, and they are receiving public school money, essentially.
That's correct.
I think it's also important to note that we are held to certain checks and balances and mandates and requirements that those other schools are not as well.
You're absolutely right, and that's actually something that we've advocated for in working in Columbus. Was for a similar system. If we are providing public dollars to private schools through vouchers, that they be held to the same standard academically. And there was a lot of pushback and lobbying against that, and that legislation did not go through. And a big reason for that is overall, the schools that are accepting vouchers are performing at lower levels than public schools are in Ohio.
I just want to say one thing on actually contacting the representatives at the end of the slide or slideshow. I know that this and various other things are topics that people get very passionate about, can get very heated about, things like that. But if you are going to call any of your representatives, whether you call during hours or you call after hours, they're much more likely to even give you a few seconds of listening if you're kind and direct about it. Don't call up and start yelling and screaming that you're angry about something, because I know I would not feel very good about that. That would not be something that would help me be very receptive to what people are saying. That's definitely going to go for your Congress people and all your elected officials also. So, and a lot of times there's staffers on the other end. You're not talking to Max Miller. You're talking to one of his staffers. So,
And I agree 100% with what you're saying. And the reason why is because everybody wants what's best for kids in Ohio. And one thing that we have to keep in mind is we're working with legislators is they've got really big jobs, and schools and school funding is one little piece of it. And a lot of times they just don't know. And what we need to do is make sure they know.
I think, I don't know whether I sent you this article, but I think there was an article I read today where after kids go into schools with vouchers over a 3-year period, their test scores actually go down
Yep.
in every level. I mean, they drastically drop in English and science, math. So it's not like they're not necessarily getting a better education. And also, supposedly Max Miller is supposed to show up at the library on Saturday at 3:45. So you can always come up there and talk to him then. But I have a feeling he's not going to be there. But be nice to see.
Last question. One of the slides had what? Oh, okay. Well, you can go last, Becky. You had 1.2 billion that was the state spent last year.
Correct, on vouchers.
And where did that figure come from?
Yeah, that's right from the state. Those are actual figures.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Sable, you mentioned that this presentation will be available on the website. What about you giving the presentation? Because I think it's valuable for people to hear actually what you're saying. Is it possible to snippet this out of the board meeting and post it?
Yeah, that's actually, Amy and I have already had that conversation. Yeah, the communication that's going out to staff, I think tomorrow, we won't be able to have it cut to just the presentation, but we're going to give a link to the board meeting later. When we do have it isolated to the presentation, we'll make sure that's available. In addition to that, we are preparing to do a podcast on this information as well. We're actually waiting to do that podcast until after spring break, the first or second week in April, because we're hoping we'll have updated information on the state budget and the school funding formula, because it should be moved on from the House, and I'll have been back in Columbus by then and should have some additional information. Great, thank you.